Hello everyone! In this video, we will talk about global migration and the reasons behind it. We will also learn the benefits and challenges of migration to both receiving and sending countries. Aside from that, we will also discuss the problems that global migration brings, such as human trafficking and the integration of migrants in the receiving countries. Lastly, we will see the movement of people in our country as one of the leading providers of workforce in the world. But before that, let me present our objectives. So, our objectives are identify the reasons for the migration of people, explain why states regulate migrations, and discuss the effects of global migration on the economic well-being of states. Now, what is migration? So, migration or human migration is the movement of people from one place to another with intentions of settling permanently or temporarily at a new location. Ang migration is isa ni siya ka normal activity nga ginahimo sa tao since nature na sa atoa nga move from one country to another or locality or sa bisan asa nga lugar for different purposes. Migration can also be permanent, temporary, or seasonal since naay uban nga mo migrate to another place tungod kay gusto mag-settle down but naapoy uban nga mga immigrants ganing migrate temporarily. As what I've said, migration happens for a range of reasons. We have always been migratory, but these movements are the reasons why areas get populated, communities experience diversity, and economies prosper. Now, migration has also two types. The first one is the internal migration, in which refers to people moving from one area to another within one country. So, when we say internal migration, mahitabo lang ni siya if ang isa ka tao is ni-migrate from one place to another, pero naa sa isa ka country gihapon, naa siya sa same country. Say for examples, kita nga nagpuyo diri sa Mindanao, then mubalhin tagpuyo sa Luzon para didto manarbaho or mo eskwela. So that is an example of internal migration since same lang man Japon na country ang atong gibalhinan, though lahi na siya nga lugar. The second type is the international migration. International migration occurs when people cross borders of one country to another. Sa diri nga part is nag-involve na ni siya og another country, in which ang tao kay ning migrate na jud from one country to another country, unlike sa internal organization. Say for example, you are a Filipina tas nagminyo kag American, then namalhin mog puyo sa Amerika. So in-ana ang international migration from one country to another. International migration has also 5 types. The first one is the immigrants. So those are the people who move permanently to another country. So ginatawag og immigrant ang isa ka tao once nga mobalhin sila sa isa ka country for good. Kanang didto na jud sila mamuyo. For example, kanang from Mexico ka then you move to USA para didto na magpuyo permanently. So you are called now as immigrant. The second one refers to workers who stay in another country for a fixed period, at least 6 months in a year. So, they are called as migrant workers or foreign workers. So, naga-work sila outside their country. Isa ka example ani kay kanang mga OFWs, in which naa sila mga kontrata kung kano saan lang sila taman didto sa isa ka country nga ilang giadtuan para manarbaho. And for the third group, we have the illegal migrants. When we say illegal migrants, those are people nga nag-engage sa illegal immigration. Sila ang mga tao nga ningbiya sa usa ka country and niadto sa another country without having official permission. Pero ang pinaka-rampant ani nga case is katong mga workers nga na-expire ang visa. For example, isa ka kay OFW nga narbaho sa Dubai. Then, nahupas na ang visa or na-expire na, but dili pa ka gusto mo uli for some personal reasons. So, wala kay choice kundi mag-TNT or tago ng tago. So, isa na ka illegal migrant. But take note that this action creates the risk of detention, deportation, and/or other sanctions. Now we have the fourth group, which refers to those migrants whose families have petitioned them to move to the destination country. So this type of international migration is also called as chain migration. This is a migration of people to a specific location because relatives or members of the same nationality previously migrated there. For example, you are from Thailand, then ibalhin kag puyo sa Canada. Then you gradually sponsors all your family members para mo move na pod sa Canada. So that is an example of chain migration. The last group are refugees. They are also known as asylum seekers. Refugees are people who have fled war, violence, conflict, or persecution and have crossed an international border to find safety in another country. So, kaning mga refugees are those napugos lang, namubiya sa ilang country para sa ilahang safety. For example, naay war na nahitabo sa ilang country and dili na jud safe para mo stay dito. Bisan og dili nila gusto mibiya but mandated na jud na move na sila para maka-escape ato nga war. Demographers estimate that 247 million people are currently living outside the countries of their birth. 90% of them moved for economic reasons while the remaining 10% were refugees and asylum seekers. Pag sinabi nating demographers ay sila yung mga expert in the statistics about changing structures of human population. So, according to them, 247 million katao ang mga nag-migrate outside sa ilahang country. So, simply speaking, daghan jud ang mga tao nga nag-engage sa international migration. 90% po sa ilaha is ang reason nga nung nag-migrate sila, it's because of economic reasons. Pwede nga mas taas ang sweldo dito, mas nice ang quality education, or mas nice ang pamuyo dito. While ang 10% kay those people nga na-forced mo balhin sa isa ka country to escape from war. Sila tong ginatawag og refugees or asylum seekers. There are top 3 regions of origin, meaning mauni sila ang mga regions nga daghag mamamayan or citizen nga nanghawa. The top 1 is Latin America, followed by Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and the third one are Middle East and North Africa. Pero if per country naman ang basihan, China, India, and Mexico naman ang leading. Then, ang Philippines and Afghanistan is pang 6 lang sila as country nga daghang nang hawa or nag-migrate to another. And usually, ang destination ani mga tao na nanghawa kay didto sa West, Middle East, and United States. So, that is all about for migration.
Good day once again, and I'm Annabel Saturinas, and for today I'm going to further expound the table which is represented by migrant contribution to the following countries in GDP by year 2015. GDP, or Gross Domestic Product, is the total monetary or market value of all the finished goods and services produced within country borders. So just the overview of the standard of what does it mean by contribution, and to show the relationship in the table between the country, the contribution, and the percentage of GDP. So the core benefits of migration are the following: fueling growth, innovation, and entrepreneurship. So this is what it means by contribution. It actually provides opportunities, more manpower, and raises living standards. That is, reduction in unemployment, and migrants may return home with the new skills. Now, for the top in the table, we have United States. The most open country has recorded a total of 47 million immigrants as of 2015. That is 14.4% of the total US population. And in the table, the data shows that these 47 million immigrants has contributed $2 trillion, that is equivalent to 2,000 billions, and total of 11% of the total GDP of US. Therefore, by calculation, more or less the total GDP of US as of 2015 is more than $18 trillion. $2 trillion is contributed by migrants. Now let us proceed to the Germany. Germany has more than 1 million migrants. Many of them are Syrians escaping their country's civil war. They traveled across the Mediterranean and Europe to reach Germany. So these migrants contributed $550 billion, as what the table is showing us. That is 17% of total GDP of Germany in 2015. So by calculation also, almost $3.3 trillion is the total GDP of Germany. And let's proceed to the United Kingdom. UK has recorded 300,000 migrants per year. That table here shows that $390 billion are the contribution of migrants. That is 14% of the total GDP. And same with Australia. We have here accumulated $330 billion. That is 25% of the total GDP. That's worth $1 trillion and $320 billion. Then finally, we have Canada, who in 5 destination countries in the table has least recorded contribution by migrants, which is $320 billion. But we also should take note that since Canada is the least, we have least recorded contribution by migrants, but US has the least percentage of GDP that actually migrants have contributed. So in Canada, almost 21% of Canada's GDP is the percentage of that is what the migrants are actually contributing to the country. That is as of 2015. Okay, and we proceed to the next slide. Is what the table has illustrated earlier, the benefit and contribution is actually evident. So there is a question here: are migrants assets or liabilities to the country's development? The migrant influx has led to a debate in destination countries over the issue of whether migrants are assets or liabilities to national development. Now here we have a term, influx, which means inward flow of large number of something, and in this case, migrants. So now we will going to find out the disadvantage of migration through the lenses of what we call them nationalists or the anti-immigrants. Nationalists are people who are loyal and are proud of their country. Therefore, the country should be theirs alone. Number one rebuts of these nationalists: immigrants will take their jobs and lower wages, which targets the poor. Their second rebut: immigrants abuse welfare state, and as what anti-immigrants also emphasize, a net fiscal cost, which eventually means that immigrants consume more in government benefits than they generate tax revenue. The immigrants, are provided by the government and have consumed more than what they contribute. That is according to nationalistic approach, claiming that they are a burden than a blessing. Also, they argue that immigrants increase economic inequality, immigrants pose terrorism risk and bombing, and finally, immigrants bring with them bad cultures, ideas that tend to destroy social balance and economic growth, that they will just destroy more wealth than they create. Now, to proceed, here we have the nationalistic approach. Nationalists, as what I have introduced earlier, believe that migrants are liabilities to national development instead of an asset. They actually believe that governments must control the legal immigration, even if it's legal. There are factual documents. The nationalists or the anti-immigrants actually believe that the government should put a control to it and put a stop to legal entry of foreigners. And number 3, this nationalistic approach gain influence through political leaders who share the same beliefs. And in the following slides, we will going to know who are these political leaders who have who are into the idea of anti-immigration. Here we have U.S. President Donald Trump for the upper left, and ladies and gentlemen, we have in the lower right UK Prime Minister Theresa May. So the former U.S. President, we have Donald Trump. Both politicians have been reversing the existing pro-immigration and refugee sympathetic policies of the United States of people from majority Muslim countries, even those with proper documentation. Now, Trump also continues to speak about his election promise of building a wall between the United States and Mexico. So here we have Trump also continues to speak about his election promise of building a wall. That is, he campaigned on protectionist trade policies throughout his candidacy, and he spent the first few days as president signing executive orders that reinforce his vow to put America first. Trump has expressed openness to execute a new trade deal with the UK, but has said he will prioritize American jobs. Now, for the next slide, we have the wisdom of this government action, though, has been constantly belied by the data. Belied means being denied by the fact-based research. That is, according to the 2011 Harvard Business School survey on the impact of immigration, they concluded that the likelihood and magnitude of adverse labor market effects for native from immigration are substantially weaker than often perceived. That is, this shows that the impact of immigration on social welfare is very small. This is very opposite to the refutes of anti-immigrants or nationalistic group, which they have been emphasizing that immigrants abuse social welfare. Therefore, the myth immigrants abuse the welfare state is false, and the fact is immigrants use significantly less welfare than native-born Americans. So this is a counterintuitive to what the government presumed. It's not as bad and disadvantageous at all as what the government again is arguing. Additionally, the 2013 reports on the government welfare spending by Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, this seemed to have sloped the argument of anti-immigrants that immigrants are consuming the government's budget. This actually found that native-born citizens actually receive higher support compared to immigrants. The fact is, immigrants in the United States have about a net zero effect on government budgets, and they pay about as much in taxes as they consume in benefits. To support this, the massive inflow of refugees from Syria and Iraq has raised alarm bells once again, but has not proved to be as damaging as expected. The International Monetary Fund predicted that the flow of refugees fleeing the war in Syria and Iraq would actually grow Europe's GDP, albeit modestly. Also, we have here the OECD, which is comprised of 37 member countries that discuss and develop economic and social policy. OECD members are typically democratic countries that support free market economies. And lastly, we have here in Germany, the inflow of refugees from the Middle East has not affected social welfare programs. Actually, they had a very little impact on wages and employment, and finally, in fact, they have brought much needed labor and manpower to the economy instead.
Benefits and detriments for the sending countries. One aspect of migration that is pursued to benefit the sending country is the payment of remittances, or the sending of money back home. These large transfers of money from the prosperous developed world to the impoverished developing world are often viewed as key to the latter's economic development. And moreover, one of disadvantages of the sending countries in global migration is loss of financial and information wealth. When countries are experiencing high levels of migration, the young population of that country will not be provided their previous level of economic contributions. This can result in a significant loss of wealth to the country as a whole. In 2014, as you can see, India held the highest recorded remittance, a total of $70 billion, followed by China, $62 billion, the Philippines, $28 billion, and lastly, the Mexico, $25 billion. These remittances contribute significantly to the growth of small and medium-term industries that help create jobs. Remittances can affect migrants' economic and social standing, as seen by new or redeveloped residences and their families' access to new consumer items. The purchasing power of a migrant family doubles, allowing children to begin or continue their education. So, how does remittance affect the economy? Remittances have the potential to decrease labor supply and foster a culture of reliance that constrains economic progress. Remittances can boost non-tradable goods consumption, raise their cost, strengthen the real exchange rate, and reduce exports, reducing the recipient's country's competitiveness in global markets. However, there are serious concerns regarding the economic sustainability of those who rely on migrant monies. The Asian Development Bank observes that in countries like the Philippines, remittances do not have a significant influence on other key items of consumption or investments such as spending on education and healthcare. Remittances, therefore, may help in lifting households out of poverty, but not in rebalancing growth, especially in the long run. As one of the world's largest recipients of remittances, the Philippines received remittances roughly 12% of its gross domestic product in 2008. Remittances have become the single most important source of foreign exchange to the economy and a significant source of income for recipient families. Using the instrument variable estimation technique, this study examines the role of remittances in increasing household consumption and investment, and thereby their potential for rebalancing economic growth and creating long-term human and capital investment. The results indicate that remittances negatively influence the share of food consumption in the total expenditure. However, unlike previous studies, the estimations show that remittances to the Philippines do not have a significant influence on other key items of consumption or investment, such as spending on education and health care. A further analysis using logistical regression shows that remittances help to lift households out of poverty. Remittances thus may help in fighting poverty in the Philippines, but not in rebalancing growth, especially in the long run. Furthermore, global migration is siphoning qualified personnel and removing dynamic young workers. This is commonly referred to as brain drain. According again to the Mackenzie Global Institute, countries in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia have lost a third of their college graduates. 60% of those who moved to OECD destinations were college graduates, compared to just 9% of the overall population in the country. 52% of Filipinos who lived for work in the developed world have tertiary education, which is more than double the 23% of the overall Filipino population. When we say OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, is a unique forum where the governments of 37 democracies with market-based economies collaborate to develop policy standards to promote sustainable economic growth. Migration has become a source of contention in many countries. However, McKinsey Global Institute research suggests that it delivers large economic benefits that might be increased if migration are integrated more effectively. Furthermore, the loss of professionals in certain key roles, such as doctors, has been detrimental to the migrants' home countries. In 2006, some 15% of locally trained doctors from 21 sub-Saharan African countries had immigrated to the United States or Canada. The losses were particularly steep in Liberia, where 43% of doctors left, Ghana 30%, and Uganda 20%. Governments are aware of this long-term disadvantage, yet they have no option but to continue supporting migrant labor as part of state policy due to the influence of remittances on GDP. They are also interested with creating jobs for an unused workforce and maximizing the inflow of worker remittances.
So, hello everyone, I'm Glizzie Sumook and I'm from BSED Math 2A, and today we're going to tackle about the problem of human trafficking. So before we go to our main topic, let us first know what is a human trafficking. So human trafficking, it involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial for sex act. So in other words, human trafficking, it is the coercion or forcing adults and children to sell their bodies for sex. Yun na siyang human trafficking. But then, it doesn't only revolves with that, human trafficking. Human trafficking, it also involves of labor exploitation. So, what do you mean by labor exploitation? So, kaning labor exploitation, it refers to situations where people are coerced to work for little or no remuneration, often under threat of punishment. So if we say coercion, it is threatening or forcing people. Therefore, labor exploitation muna siya ang mga type of workers na or type of people na ginapugos sila magtrabaho without remuneration or walay sweldo. Or if na may sweldo, kanang gamay lang siya. Tapos ginapugos pa sila. So, kana labor exploitation, it is a part of human trafficking. Okay, so on top of the issue of brain drain, sending state must likewise protect migrant workers. So human trafficking is also one of the most relevant issues, most especially for migrant workers. Since ang kaning mga migrant workers, mo din sila ang kaning mga most common or most victim. Kaning mga migrant workers, mo sila ang mga mostly yung mga biktima aning human trafficking. Gani, according to the Census of the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation, ang human trafficking, it is the third largest criminal activity worldwide. So, na-part siya sa kaning mga largest criminal activity worldwide ang human trafficking, since it is very relevant na issue siya. So in 2012, the International Labour Organization or ILO identified 21 million men, women, and children as victims of forced labor. So if we say forced labor, muna siya ang kanang mga pugson nga motrabaho, no? So as you can see here sa chart sa right side or sa left right side we can see na 90% or 18.7 million of people are exploited by private enterprises and entrepreneurs. So if we say exploited, muna sila ang mga tao or mga person where unfair or kanang ginagamit sila in an unfair or selfish way. And then 22% or 4.5 million people are sexually abused, and 68% or 14.2 million people work under compulsion in agriculture, manufacturing, infrastructure, and domestic activities. So as you can see, the country kayo in 2012 lang na siya na census. I haven't really researched what is the census na now in 2022 or last year 2021, but then in 2012 21 million jud ang na-identified na mga biktima sa forced labor. So human trafficking has also been very profitable of a high as $150 billion a year in 2014. So as we can see, dako jud kaayo ang ilang ginansya sa human trafficking aning mga human trafficking. So kinsa man ang mga nag-benefit ani. So muna sila kaning mga sindikato, mga smuggler, mga corrupt state officials, Sa census sa 2014, year 2014, $150 billion ang ilahang na kinansya sa human trafficking. It's kind of sad para sa mga biktima sa human trafficking actually. Na biktima sila. And that's why we somehow question ourselves na unsa ang mga moves na ginahimo sa mga government officials, mga private sector, mga civil society groups. So as you can see, there's a question here in the bottom part that does the government's, private sector, and civil society groups ever do something to prevent or to combat human trafficking? No, actually nasa lang mga moves or mga steps nga namihimo in order to prevent human trafficking, but then just like what the paragraph has been said here, the results remain uneven. So therefore, ang human trafficking, it wasn't really fully na prevent or na stop yun siya. Although na mga biktima nga mga natabangan in some ways na prevent ang human trafficking, but not 100% yun siya na na combat ang human trafficking. So now let us proceed to our next topic, which is integration. So as we all know already, integration, it is the unification of different groups or things. So therefore, in integration, there is a unity in different things. So the reason why we are tackling integration today is that we are going to see if there is really integration in regards sa mga migrants and the citizens of a particular country. And we're also going to know if how does these migrants handle the pressure and the culture differences, the discriminations of the citizens of a receiving countries kung asa sila nagatrabaho. So this is the kind of integration that we're going to tackle today. So, integration. A final issue relates to how migrants interact with their new home countries. So they may contribute significantly to a host nation's GPD, but their access to housing, healthcare, and education is not easy. So this is really true, when you're going to migrate or if you're going to transfer or to migrate to another country, it is really hard to access, most especially like for example in education. Like when you're planning to migrate to other country because you're going to pursue your education there, it is really not that easy na maka-eskwela din ka sa laing lugar. Kaya like for example, nagplan ka nga mag-eskwela sa mga university sa Korea, dili man din kadayon dito ang maka-eskwela dyan sa mga university sa Korea, because one of their rules dito sa mga Korean universities is that you still need to learn their Korean language. So instead nga maka-diretso kag mga university, you still need to study their language before nga makasulod ka dito. But then, despite of that, there is, of course, considerable variations in the economic integration of migrants. So migrants from China, India, and Western Europe often have more success, while those from the Middle East, North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa face greater challenges in securing jobs. Even in the United States and Singapore, there are blue-collar as well as white-collar Filipino workers such as doctors, engineers, even corporate executives, and it is the professional white-collar workers that have oftentimes been easier to integrate. So democratic states assimilate immigrants and their children by granting them citizenship and the right that go with it, especially public education. However, without a solid support from their citizens, switching citizenship may just be a formality. So, if you thought na having or getting a citizenship is easy, apparently it's not, no. It is actually very kute na makuha o citizenship of a particular country. It needs solid support from their citizens in order nga makakuha dahin ka og citizenship. So linguistic difficulties, costumes from the old country, and of late differing religion may create cleavages between migrants and citizens of receiving countries, particularly in the West. Because Western people, they somehow, they always accuse migrants of bringing in the culture from their home countries and amplifying differences in linguistic and ethnic costumes. Actually, this is very a sad scenario, no? I have seen a video on YouTube na K-pop dance cover in public place in that particular Western country, and then ang mga tao dito ginamock sila. As what I have read earlier, the reason why they always did that is that they didn't want the migrants to bring their culture from their home country and amplifying differences in linguistic and ethnic costumes. No? So crucially, the lack of integration gives xenophobic and anti-immigrant groups more ammunition to argue that these new citizens are often not nationals in the sense of sharing the dominant culture. So that's why migrants unwittingly reinforce the tension by keeping among themselves. So meaning, keeping among themselves, kani mga migrants, they decided na lang na if ilang mga culture, i-keep na lang nila silang kaugalingan, no? Dili na lang nila i-show that particular country ang ilang culture. Because, again, they didn't want that. They didn't want a particular culture to bring to their country. Because they also have their own culture as well. And local networks of fellow citizens mitigated the safety of the first-time migrants. Because again, due to experiences of the old migrants, ang mga first-time migrants, wag mo atake bitaw ilang anxiety. Every time ay naa sila sa mga strange places or unfamiliar places or unfamiliar area. So, kaning mga local networks sa fellow citizens, ginatabangan nila ni mga first-time migrants para dili sila mahadlok. Ilang ginamitigate ang ilang anxiety. Like for instance, kaning Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association of California, they provide initial support for new Chinese migrants, guiding them in finding work or in setting up their small businesses in the state and elsewhere. So in order to avoid any discrimination of other citizens of a particular receiving country, so kaning Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association of California, they decided to create a particular area nga para lang sa mga Chinese. Though it may sound good na nasa mga advantages since they are protecting these Chinese people or even other culture nga ma-discriminate sa ilahang or sa ilahang citizens mismo. Pero they somehow forgot to facilitate integration. That is the main thing dira, ang nakalimot sila og facilitate og integration. Instead, they exacerbate differences and discrimination. That's why ang mga government and other private businesses, they made a policy changes to address integration problems like using multiple languages in state documents. Like for example, in the state of United States, they use Spanish and English. Or for example, here in the Philippines, we use English and Filipino. So, training programs complemented with counseling have also helped migrants' integration in Hamburg, Germany, while retail merchants in Barcelona have brought in migrant shopkeepers to break down language barriers while introducing Chinese culture to citizens. So, these are the methods that the government uses para ma-facilitate nilang integration sa particular na country. So if ever you're going to ask if kani ba siya nga method is very effective or this method that is being created by the governments and private businesses is effective, well, according to the last sentence of this paragraph, it is being said that whether these initiatives will succeed or not remains an open question. So therefore, kani siya nga method sa governments and private businesses, it's still under observation if kini ba siya nga a method is effective or not.
Good morning. I am Daryl Abonero, and this is the conclusions of the topic under Lesson 10 titled Global Migration. First, I had to read the bullet form sentence and later I explained it to you what is the meaning of this conclusions under Lesson 10. Number 1. Global migration entails the globalization of people, and like the broader globalization process, it is uneven. Number 2. Like globalizations, moreover, migration produces different and often contradictory responses. Number 3. Yet, despite these various contradictions, it is clear that different forms of global interdependence will ensure the global migration will continue to be one of the major issues in the contemporary world. And lastly, countries whose economies have become entirely dependent on globalization and rely on foreign labor to continue growing will actively court foreign workers.
Unlike the broader globalization process, as we can observe, increased migration is one of the most visible and significant aspects of globalization. Growing numbers of people moving in countries and across borders, looking for better employment opportunities and better lifestyle. Some instances, migration is usually seen as problematic. It contributes to sustainable development. A lot of people, especially those people that are educated and professional, we all know that there's a lot of opportunities for them, especially if they're searching for a high salary. However, it is problematic sometimes because the viewpoint might that it is usually seen as the problem that migration process, usually the victims of sex trafficking, we can't deny it. Let's continue. Japan, Canada, United States, Florida, and Germany view as richer states that according to them, migrant labor is advantageous for their economies. Those mentioned countries and workers from young countries which is our own, Philippines, as working population grow up. For example, United States, they need more skilled workers and require migrant workers. However, their local workers are began to reject, to preserve, to become aware of as local culture. They protect it from newcomers. But other state migrants, usually called scapegoats or person who is blaming for the mistakes or faults that in reality caused by government policy and not by foreigners. Countries whose economies have become extremely growing and dependent to globalization, rely on foreign labor, will actively court foreign workers. Likewise, the Philippines with abundance of labor and need for remittance, which means tend to reduce poverty, to send this, to tend
these workers or to send these workers. Certain to happen that countries will have to open up again to prevent their countries from collapsing. The responses to these movements, prejudice against people from the other countries, and extreme nationalism. In the receiving countries, dependency in the sending countries will continue to be pressing issues. And that's it. I hope you understand.